I grew up in a place where they told you what to chase, told you how to run the race. Every move was on the page, but I didn't like their way. Had to fight and misbehave, had to find a way to change, had to leave to find my way.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome to Gamble, the high-stakes game of life. I'm your host, TJ Lasig. We're going to take things in a bit of a different direction this episode because we're going to talk some TV, scripted TV, reality TV, and just kind of the whole world of media in general and how that's really changed over time. I feel like particularly in the last couple of years. This past week, it was the season finale of the show Severance, which took a lot of people by storm and stirred up a lot of debate online. I'm also personally a big fan of the show Survivor, best show ever, which is currently in season right now. And somehow the themes of these shows actually tie more into the theme of this podcast than you would think. So, Cupe, that's what we're going to talk about today. But I'm going to jump right into it because you once tweeted, "Severance is the best show since Breaking Bad." Do you stand by that tweet after seeing the season through?
I do stand by it. I think it is a phenomenal show that has captured the attention of the masses. And the reason why I think it captured the attention is that the hook for Severance is just magnificent. People doing jobs, trading their time for money, but not exactly enjoying or thriving their daily existence inside of their working hours. And then a television show comes along where there's a procedure that you can get to split your personality, yourself, into an innie and an outie. And that's just instantly recognizable as an audience. It's instantly incredibly interesting as an audience. And as the show progresses, you go through the journey, the story arc of all of the characters. I think the character development is also really good. I think the broad concepts and what they're trying to accomplish with Severance is an idea that many people probably have had, but nobody acted upon, and these guys acted upon it, and Ben Stiller and Adam Scott and everyone else involved in the show, just like phenomenal work. And I do think it is going to end up going onto a top 5, top 10 list of best shows of all time. We'll be very interested to see and hear what happens next. These days, it's so interesting between like shows and how long it takes to produce some of these shows and how long of a break these seasons take is interesting to think through. Like, I mean, these days you don't get TV that is written out, 5 seasons. You write a season at a time and then you write another season. A lot of the Game of Thrones talk and things like that, where the books don't essentially line up to the shows. So it'll be really interesting to follow. I think it was renewed for a season 3. I don't know how quickly they'll be able to produce that, but obviously season 1 was way back in COVID times, and the showrunners and people have talked about why it became so difficult, but it's also why the show had some of the nuances that it had with the white walls, and there was nobody else really in these scenes. There's not a lot of extras. So it's just a really, really interesting show. I'm interested to hear your take on Severance and what you think about it.
It's also crazy. I think I saw it cost $20 million an episode or some outrageous number like that for the second season. So I wonder if they'll have a bit of a tighter budget on the third season. But for me, I like the show. I thought it was good. I do feel like it's one of the more polarizing shows I've seen out there, because I see 2 schools of thought, where you have the people that are like, best show of all time, the absolute perfect TV show, like literally the greatest. And then you've got people who watch the show and have legitimately no idea what's going on and find it boring the whole time, which my wife is one of those people. She just sits there and is like, I don't get it. What's happening? And I'm like, well, we're not really supposed to know what's happening yet. That's the thing. We don't really find out until the end. So, I mean, I thought it was a great show. I thought there was a bit of slowness for sure, but I think that the finale was solid, made it really worth it. But one of the things to me about Severance is there's new kind of way of watching TV where it's not just about watching the episode and the show. It extends much beyond that. And Severance is a prime example because there's all kinds of, whether it be podcasts or YouTube shows about it, or articles written, or deep in the Reddit threads where people are talking about theories of what's happening and this and that. And that's, to me, one of the things where Severance is top of mind there. And I've also watched TV like that for quite a while. I mentioned Survivor. Part of my watching Survivor, I listen to a podcast after. So I really like this concept of watch a show and also kind of have community and content around it, which is an interesting growth in media and TV that has really taken off these past couple of years.
Yeah, television is so interesting because it creates this alternative reality that people can live in. And that's why I think it's so captivating. And also why it's so challenging to create a show that reaches the masses. There's so many TV shows that are out there. There's so much production that happens and it never gets past, the niche the niche groups of people that are really interested in it. And it doesn't surprise me whatsoever that you're deep into the reality TV and game show TV experience, because it matches basically exactly who you are: a game player, confident in your ability to accomplish anything. You've said multiple times, like, if I were to go in Survivor, I could win. And I think that's an interesting angle. And then, like, ever learning and applying like these new applicable skills to your own life, like that is you in a nutshell. So it definitely makes sense that you're all in on that kind of TV. But I think for me, the concept of creating content around TV shows and whether it's Reddit or articles or YouTube videos, you can tell, and I'm sure these creators that do this for movies and for television, people just thirst for more. People thirst to get into a niche community that wants to talk about this stuff endlessly, or pontificate of what were the writers thinking when they did this. I mean, there's an YouTube video after every Severance show or Severance episode that I watch that breaks down like all the things that you missed. I'm like, I have no idea who watches a show like this, because there's no way you'd even see one or two of the things that they basically say that you missed, or you have to remember exact lines from 8 episodes ago that someone said to catch it. So it is, I'm not deep into Severance in that way. It is interesting to watch and hear the theories that come about. And that certainly informs how you watch the show. I think, when I watched the first 3 or 4 episodes, I wasn't really getting that deep with it. But then as you watch some of the content or read some of the content that's out there, it changes your own mind and changes the way in which you consume that content and the TV. So I do think it is a new and modern way in which how people watch and consume television, because community and like-minded people want to band together around something. So this is a way that those people can get deeper into the things that they like.
Definitely. And watching Severance in particular, I did not consume any content throughout, but after the finale, I did look at some stuff and I was like, okay, yeah. I was somewhere in between of the person that didn't quite know what was going on, because there were a couple things where I'm like, I did not really catch that this is what they were putting down, but it makes sense now that I read about it. But also, I feel like a lot of the stuff was always unknown in the show and intended to be unknown until it gets all tied together with the finale. And for me, I wouldn't consider myself a huge TV watcher when it comes to the scripted stuff. I was watching Severance and I'm watching White Lotus. Feel like most people are watching those. That's pretty much it for scripted stuff. And then I'm deep into the reality TV, mostly the strategy reality TV games. I already mentioned Survivor, my favorite show of all time. My new favorite one has been Traitors. Traitors is a really, really interesting strategy show. If you're familiar at all with the game Mafia or Wolf, it's basically Mafia / Wolf, but as a reality TV show, and it's almost like this interesting reality TV melting pot, because they bring in people from game shows like Survivor and Big Brother and The Challenge, and then they bring in people from Bravo, The Bachelor. So it's this really interesting dynamic where it's a mix of game players and just reality TV personalities, which makes for good TV in general. And I also think just adds a different dynamic when, everyone has somewhat of a reputation at stake. It's not just random people going on these shows. So that's why I really like Traders. Another new one is Deal or No Deal Island. That's in its second season, and that's been fun. And then Big Brother is a classic. Big Brother is just the craziest because it's on 3 times a week, so that's a big effort. But must admit, the guilty pleasure right now is that my wife and I are watching Big Brother 10, which is from, I don't even know, 10 plus years ago. And we've already watched Big Brother 2 and Big Brother 7. So we went on a little bit of kick of rewatching old Big Brother seasons, which takes a long time, but we just kind of put that on in the background as we're doing whatever throughout our nights. And then Summer House, my final absolute guilty pleasure. I'm a big Summer House guy. I really like that show.
Yeah, I'm definitely more of a scripted television watcher than I am reality or like game shows. I'll watch some of the shows. It's funny, my wife kind of dabbles between like ultra hardcore reality, all the Bravo type shows. um, and then she really does like some of the game show stuff. So she actually got me watching Traders. We watched the season before this current one is on. I don't think we're up to date on the current one, but I do think it's interesting to sit down and watch how people strategize and play these games, on TV. I do think you said it well. It's a melting pot of reality TV with all the different characters and bringing in known faces and known names. And
one of the problems with Traders right now and some of these in general is that certain people that have a reputation of being a good game player just like have no chance. They just get voted off in the beginning and there's nothing they can do. Like their reputation precedes them kind of thing. So that's my one gripe with that. And I don't know if there's really a solution to it because it is the smart thing to just get rid of the good game players because why would you want them? The longer you let them in, all of a sudden they're going to win.
yeah, there's like the clickiness of the groups in that show too. It's like, are certain people going to vote for others because they were on the same TV show together or they had beef with each other on XYZ TV show. So it's easier for them to vote somebody off and stuff like that. So I do think that one is pretty interesting. But yeah, for me, I've always said like, oh, I like the scripted stuff way better. I think a lot of the HBO shows are tops of my list. I think Breaking Bad is up there as an all-time great show, but I have to sit here and admit this to the world that I haven't watched what would probably be in most major TV watchers top 3, definitely, if not best show of all time. I haven't watched any. Maybe I've watched the first episode, but I haven't watched anything past the first episode of The Sopranos. So I always say that because basically, if you haven't watched Sopranos, your list of top TV shows is discredited instantly. But yeah, I watch TV to laugh and or to kind of like just get deeply involved in a plot line. So those are the 2 main reasons why I watch TV. And it's so interesting because there's so many ways to take this conversation, but I'm a big fan of 30-minute television. I'm not as big of a fan as 60-minute television. And these days, a lot of the shows are kind of walking that 45 to 50-minute timeline. So it's very interesting to kind of capture the audience between someone who watches 30-minute shows. Shout out Entourage, best 30-minute show, in my opinion, ever. But yeah, I think I think it's trying to capture these large audiences of people that will catch on to your hook of television and then get deeply involved and intimate with the shows.
Entourage, certainly the greatest. If I could only watch one TV show on repeat for the rest of my life, it would absolutely be Entourage. I feel like they just don't make as many really strong scripted shows as they used to, which I think is why Severance and White Lotus in particular have really caught everyone's attention because it's just not as commonplace as I feel like it used to be. You had Breaking Bad, you mentioned Sopranos, Game of Thrones, Dexter, all of these shows that seemingly everyone watched. I feel like for whatever reason, they're just fewer and further in between at this point. But all of those are some. I'm on the same boat with you as Sopranos. I've actually tried at least 2 or 3 times to watch it, and I just never quite got into it, which makes me believe I'm not that big of a Sopranos fan. I'm also an anti-Game of Thrones guy. I know that's an unpopular take, but never really got into Game of Thrones. I'm more of a Breaking Bad, Dexter in that category. And then I feel like there's the 30-minute category. Entourage and Curb Your Enthusiasm are my two favorites there.
Yeah, and if someone's 10 to 30 years older than us, they would irrefutably refute that Entourage is the best, because they would say that Seinfeld is the greatest sitcom / 30-minute show of all time. Of course, Seinfeld is one of the greatest. But yeah, I think all of I think you brought up an interesting thing with like the Severance budget and, spending all this money to create a TV show. I've always thought about, okay, well, how do TV shows ultimately make money, right? Because, if you're going to spend $20 million on something, like, you need to return money. And it's funny that Apple came out and said they're getting slaughtered, I believe, on the Apple TV product, something like $1.5 billion in the hole or something, which is crazy. So you ultimately need to create sustainable ways to make revenue and profit ultimately, which is probably a pretty hard thing for television to do. Now, I don't know what will happen with Severance long term, but I have to imagine that more people are watching Apple TV or subscribing to Apple TV given Severance is out there. But how do you measure that is probably pretty hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, when you're spending that much money, you can't possibly profit, I feel like. So that's and it's also just crazy how many streaming services there are now, and you basically have to have access to all of them because there's always one show here, one show there. It's not like one place has all of the quote unquote good shows, best shows. So yeah.
Yeah, in terms of that, such an interesting conversation too, because I find myself now in the middle. I was one of those people that I have had cable for a long time. I never, probably 5 or 6 years ago, when switching to streaming was just the most profitable and best thing you can do for in terms of costs. I always delayed. I always put it off. I never did streaming because it was like I had internet and cable all combined. I would have then had to break it all down, pay for streaming, pay for internet. And I was like, oh, maybe the cost is there, but I just didn't want to go through it. And now I feel like it's coming more full circle, where there's, everything is an app. Everything is $10 a month to $25 a month. You need X, Y, and Z things. And the cable kind of sells you all of that stuff at cost, and you can kind of include it all in your package. So I do think it's very interesting, the battle that we're in now between apps fighting amongst each other. And then you see like the likes of Disney and Hulu and ESPN Plus. Now they have a bundle. So now there's basically bundles for quote unquote apps, which are basically just channels in television, which is what cable was. So I do think it's so interesting, the modern times of TV that we're in right now.
That's why you just got to go with the tried and true reality TVs. Survivor, I think, is a good example of how they've optimize their cost over time. In the early days of Survivor, they would do all kinds of different locations. There was Survivor Africa and blanking on other examples. But now every season is just hosted in Fiji. Number one, I think the weather is good there. They had some runs where they went to different places and the weather was not so good, either like really miserably rainy or too hot, like dangerously hot. So it's always in Fiji now. But then that also makes them able to churn out seasons in a more efficient way. They also, over time, it used to be a 39-day game. Now it's only 26 days, which cuts down on production time majorly. Essentially, they made a lot of these changes during COVID and then probably realized like, oh, we can get the same amount of viewership and we don't have to change venue locations. We don't have to have it be 39 days. So I think that's been an interesting one to see how they've subtly made those decisions over time. And like as a viewer, you don't even really notice that that's happening. You're just like watching the show.
Yeah, for sure. In terms of Survivor, I remember like when did Survivor start? Because I remember being captivated by like the first several seasons of Survivor. I thought it was obviously a great show, and then for whatever reason, I kind of just dropped off. I haven't watched it. And then in talking to you in more recent years, I realized it's like Survivor 38 or whatever it is. So I had no idea they were even making, all of these Survivors, year in and year out ultimately.
It's season 48 right now. The first season was in 2000. And so season 50 is coming up, which is going to be some kind of big time, bring on a bunch of returning players, big superstars type thing. In season 40, they did an all winners season, which was really cool. They had got 20 people that all won the game, come back and played. And I enjoy when they do things like that. But Survivor has been around for a very long time.
So Survivor has 2 seasons basically per year.
Correct. 2 seasons every year. The only reason that I guess it's slightly behind is I think the COVID year messed it up a little bit. But yeah, 2 seasons every single year, one in the fall, one in the spring. That's what I'm saying. They churn them out, no problem. Jeff Probst is a machine, without a doubt, as the host. But I like it. And, then I mentioned the other shows, but as you said, it's no surprise that I like these kinds of shows, because to me, they're like all the other types of games that we talk about on this podcast. There's a ton of strategy involved, and then there's quite a bit of luck involved. And I just feel like any game formation where you're combining strategy and luck, and then you add in a human social element on top of it, makes it even better. So that's why I enjoy these shows. And I sit there, I tell, I like to talk a lot during these shows, because I'm always like, this person should have done this instead, or that was a smart thing to do, this, that. And Christina's like, I'm trying to watch the show. Can you stop talking? So
I can only
like
imagine a watch party with you and Survivor. It would be pure comedy. You need to start live streaming your Survivor watches. That'd be epic.
I know. Yeah. It's, I just sit there and then I'm like, I would win on Survivor if I went. But have I ever submitted an application to Survivor? No, of course not.
Will you ever?
Not. Maybe. I might be better off going on another kind of show, is a little bit of my take. I don't know. Maybe the 50s will be different. We don't need to get into it all, but I wouldn't say they're necessarily looking for my profile of person these days to cast onto the show. There hasn't really been my type, but maybe that will change back. They call it the new era of Survivor, which is fine and all, but very, very diverse set of people out there. And, but they could use an alpha white male character once again, but they don't really cast that type anymore. That's just kind of is how it is.
I see where you're headed. I mean, it makes sense. It's a change. It's a changing world, and they haven't stepped back on the old ledge, I guess, ultimately.
Yeah, but one day maybe we will apply, and then we'll talk about it on this show. That's the other thing too, though. If you actually do want to get on, you got to apply for a long period of time for the most part. But you're sending an application every year, twice a year. So maybe I need to start that process now, so that 10 years from now I can get on the show.
Yeah, I can only imagine. There's a couple people that I know that have tried to get on certain reality TV shows. I've heard about different stories of people that I know, or that my wife and I know, that have tried to get on TV, and it's definitely a massive challenge between the interviews, what kind of experience you have, how you are in front of a camera, what you can point to as your resume and stuff like that. It's a completely different world. But I would imagine that it's definitely not easy. I can't imagine the number of applicants that a show like Survivor probably is thousands, tens of thousands of applicants.
They've actually had a decent bit of poker player types on the show in the past, and it's funny because none of them have done well. Pretty much none of them have done well. You know Garrett, right? Garrett Adelstein. He was on Survivor, did horrible. So overconfident, basically had a meltdown out on the island, and was the third person voted out. Really, really bad showing, and one of the best poker players in the world, and a really physically fit guy. So it's interesting to see how that dynamic plays out. JRB was on at one point. Jean-Robert Blamd.
Okay.
Was on Survivor China back in the day. He did okay. He was funny on the show. But there's definitely precedent for the poker player, gambler type to be on the show. It's just been a long time since they have cast that type.
That makes sense. I have to imagine it's pretty. It seems like there's so much poker related experience that you could draw on, but there is so much people. You're working with people, you're working against some people. The human element there is probably a bit more challenging from the poker perspective. Whenever, in poker, everything is mostly on you and or you judging other people versus kind of working together alongside other people. I can imagine that's pretty challenging.
I think that's what it comes down to. And one of the things that is always said on the Survivor podcast that I listen to is, at the end of the day, because how Survivor works, you get to the end, there's the final three, and then the jury of people, which are the people that get voted out, they vote for the winner. And at the end of the game, for the most part, people just vote for who they liked the most. So having the social connections, being a likable person, playing the game well, but not screwing people over in the process is how you win. And I think that a lot of the hyper poker brain type of people think way too much of a game bot mentality and totally kind of miss out on the human element, which is by far the most important. Is strategy important? Yes, sure. But the number one quality that you can have in any of those games is social skills and likability and just being someone that people want to work with. And then if you get to the end, people want you to win the money.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I am so interested to see where TV goes over the next decade or so. We've talked about this, internally for a while. I do think that, like companies like Barstool Sports continues to produce their own shows and things like that, and kind of getting more and more into media, from the likes of a podcast and a blog into more and more shows and media. And, I think Bravo is one of those shows that took reality TV by storm and took it even further. We always joke that Bravo, it's probably watched, I would say, 75 to 80% of the time by women. It's really geared towards women and women's shows. But I do think there's this like men's Bravo for men concept that hasn't really hit the market just yet. And maybe these like strategy games types are part of it. I would imagine that these games are split closer to 50-50, but something like a Barstool Sports is leaning more towards like that Bravo for men. But I do think it's so interesting to see where things will go over the next decade. Obviously things have changed a ton from, scripted shows being what you mostly focused on or talked about. And now the internet talks about everything. And, then to see what makes into mainstream, something like a Severance, or how often you get like a Severance type show into the mainstream with a community around it is very interesting.
And just how split media is across not only the TV channels and networks that we talked about and the different apps, but YouTube, for example. You mentioned on the show or before recording the Mr. Beast games, right? He's a YouTube guy that is then also produced. What was that on Amazon?
Yeah, it was on. He did a deal with Amazon. I think he had a lot of his own money involved, but I believe that
was also cost him $1 bajillion, right?
Hundreds of millions for sure. He gave away the most money in game show history, $10 million to
Crazy.
The winner, which was a wild ride. But yeah, Beast Games was a really, really interesting show. I think you would enjoy it. So you should definitely check that one out.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out at some point. Well, I'll be interesting to follow, and more and more creators out there, more and more ways to get content out, not just in the form of a TV show, but creating YouTube, more and more opportunities to create content, talking about other people's content. And as you said, curious to see how that all continues to evolve in the coming years.
No doubt. Fun to chat a little television, what you're watching. I'm also, just kind of close it, wrap it. I'm also watching White Lotus, and man, if you thought Severance moved slow, I feel like White Lotus is creeping and crawling along at the same pace as Severance. So we'll see what happens here at the end of White Lotus.
Yeah, the slow movingness is definitely a little annoying that these shows
I don't hate it
at a faster pace.
I don't hate it, but I do think you need to hit a speed bump or a bit of speed occasionally. And I feel like they've been moving sort of at the same pace because, like I said, I like plot development and character development, but I think you need a little bit more than just one kind of big bang episode. I think you need that before arc and then the major climax at the end. So I think we'll see what happens.
It's 2025. We need that non-stop action. We need the dopamine hit. We need things to be fast-paced. So we'll see how White Lotus finishes up. I think there's maybe 2 episodes left there. Alrighty, that'll do it for another episode of the podcast. Thanks everyone for listening. Stay gambling.
Caught up in a daydream, I beat my mind up there almost daily. It's how I pass time, no opinions safely. It's how I understand what I want in this place. See, cause everybody wanna tell you bad things. What could go wrong, what fame brings, but success is a finicky thing. And if you ain't sure, no, it'll never be.